Yeah. So the second factor is discountability. And so what this is so when you transfer an asset to a trust, it's considered a gift for gift tax purposes, and so you have to get that asset valued. So you have to get it appraised if it's an illiquid asset, like real estate, for example, or a private company stock. If it's public company stock in NVIDIA, you don't have to get it valued because there's a way to value public stock without an appraisal. But if it's anything illiquid, you'll have to engage an appraiser to appraise it. The advantage of this is that you actually get discounts, valuation discounts by gifting illiquid assets, and I'll explain more what I mean. So if you gift $100 or 100 shares of NVIDIA stock, that's worth whatever the fair market value is. If the stock's trading at $120 a share and you transferred 100 shares, that's 120 times $100. That's $12,000, I think. But if you gift at 20% interest in, let's say, real estate, um, you get the real estate appraised for $1 million. The 20% is actually going to be less than the value of that 20% interest is going to be less than 20% of the $1 million property because because the IRS would say, look, there's that 20% minority interest is going to be it's going to be very hard to sell it, so it's not very marketable, and nobody's going to buy your 20% interest in real estate that you own 80% of, and also nobody's going to want a minority interest in that illiquid asset. They're going to want at least a majority if they don't have full control. And so basically the appraiser applies a discount to these liquid assets and they come up with a number. And that number is usually around 30% less than what you think of as the proportionate fair market value. And so a 20% interest in a $1 million illiquid asset might actually be worth closer to maybe $140,000 instead of $200,000 because of that valuation discount. And so basically what it allows you to do is it allows you to shrink the value for gift tax purposes, even though you're still transferring $200,000 of stuff, you're able to use less gift tax exemption, which means that instead of being able to transfer $14 million of stuff, you're essentially able to transfer like $20 million of stuff. And so you get more wealth into the trust while using the same amount of exemption that you would have otherwise. So,
That last kind of half sentence is an important one. I have to admit, with the last factor, the kind of the idea of potential explosive growth makes a ton of sense, and you can make a strategic decision between two assets. Which one do you think is going to grow more? Here, the question of what's the action item or what's the guidance here is a little bit tougher, right? If you're sitting on multiple assets, maybe sure, of similar value, sure, choose the one that's discountable.
yeah.
But how would you frame the planning decision or the question you'd put to a client when they're deciding they've got an widget set up and they're thinking, what do I put in there? Should they go hunting for discountable assets? Or is it more on the margin? If you've got a couple of options, might as well choose the one that's
Yeah, I would say you get more bang for the buck, but by transferring in a liquid asset, especially if it's a minority interest in a liquid asset. It just depends on what the assets are, but if you have private stock in a company, and then you also have NVIDIA stock in you have $1 million of each, you're probably gonna use $700,000 of exemption to transfer the $1 million of privately held stock, but you're gonna use $1 million to transfer the $1 million of NVIDIA stock, or $1 million of exemption, and so it's a better deal from a gift tax perspective if you transfer the privately held stock.
but that's a good way of framing it. Let me put it this way. What you're ultimately trying to do is get as much growth as possible for every dollar that you put into the trust. Assuming that you're going to use up all of your gift exemption by putting stuff into trusts, you want that $14 million of assets or whatever amount you put in to grow as big as possible. And one way to do that is to choose assets that they're going to grow from $1 to $50. That's what we talked about on the last slide. And here, one way to do that is to choose something that right now is valued at $1 because of this discountability, but actually is worth $1.30. And so when it grows, it's already got a head start. Um, I guess I'm just vamping here, making up the way that makes sense to my head. Is that a helpful way to think about it? Am I on the
Yeah,
wrong?
yeah, I think that makes sense. It's basically it's like the government's giving you a discount for transferring these sorts of partial interests in illiquid assets.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to buy the shirt that's on sale, but it might make sense to buy the shirt that's on
If you
sale.
don't like the shirt, you shouldn't buy it. But if you there's an equal chance you're gonna like that shirt as the other shirt that's more expensive, of course, a discount. And we've got I think a pretty quick question here from Omri that I put up in the
Yeah,
slide.
yeah. So the answer is no. You can't use the 409A, and the reason is that the 409A rules are different than the gift tax rules. So for those who don't know, 409A it's a type of valuation that privately held companies have to get for equity compensation purposes, for basically for options and stuff. So it's not really the fair market value of the it's not really looking at the fair market value of the shares in the company. It's doing some sort of weird thing. Usually it results in a really low number, like much lower than what a venture capitalist would invest at. And so the IRS doesn't treat 409A valuations as valid gift tax appraisals.